On November 30th, 1942, the US task force off Guadalcanal ran straight into a Japanese fleet, and they approached it with the confidence of a crew used to steamrolling every fight. The US cruisers held every advantage: radar, numbers, overwhelming firepower. They even saw the enemy first. Confident to the point of carelessness, Admiral Wright orders concentrated fire on the closest ship, Takanami. The Japanese vessel lit up under the combined hail of 48 8-inch and 6-inch shells. The Americans kept pounding, smothering the sinking ship in a storm of overkill. But as they did, other Japanese destroyers slipped through the dark. Using their legendary night-fighting skill, they outflanked the US line and moved into perfect firing position. A lookout on USS Minneapolis screamed, "Wake! Portside!" But it was too late. Success depends on more than numbers or firepower. Preparation and the right tools make all the difference. Building an app is the same. Enter Lovable, an AI-powered platform that lets you create apps and websites the way you want them. It's simple. You describe your idea to the AI, and it creates a real working project you can try out, refine, and share, skipping hours of setup. The best part of Lovable is the accessibility. Lovable is designed so that anyone with an idea can use it. Whether you are a student, a startup founder, or just someone testing a concept, you can get a prototype running quickly. In just a couple of years, Lovable has grown into a major global platform with millions of users and the support of investors putting in $200 million at a $1.8 billion valuation. So if you have an idea itching to be built, check out Lovable. Go to lovable.dev and use my code WW2YT20 for 20% off, valid until October 24th, 2025. Thanks for watching. By November 30th, 1942, the Guadalcanal campaign had become a slaughterhouse. For 4 months, Americans and Japanese had turned the waters around this godforsaken island into Iron Bottom Sound, so named for the dozens of warships rusting on the seafloor. The Japanese were desperate. Their troops on Guadalcanal were literally starving, surviving on grass and roots. American air power from Henderson Field made daylight resupply impossible. So Rear Admiral Raizo Tanaka created the Tokyo Express, a series of high-speed destroyer runs under the cover of darkness. The Americans called it the Rat Run. Fast destroyers dashed down the slot, dumped supplies in floating drums off Tassafaronga Point, and fled before dawn. It had been working. Too well, in fact. Admiral Halsey wanted it stopped immediately. To achieve this, Task Force 67 was assembled on November 27th at Espiritu Santo. 5 cruisers, 4 destroyers. The Americans were riding high after the naval battle of Guadalcanal 2 weeks earlier, where they'd stopped a major Japanese offensive. They had plenty of reasons to be confident. They were well equipped. They had radar, overwhelming firepower. Morale was sky high. A few Japanese tin cans delivering food to starving foot soldiers were no match for them. Admiral Carlton Wright stood on Minneapolis's bridge, studying his battle plan. This was to be his first major operation after being appointed to Cruiser Division 4. Wright had never led a night surface battle. His ships had never trained together. 2 destroyers had joined the task force that day, with no time to brief them. But Wright wasn't worried. His ships bristled with the latest SG radar. The Japanese were running blind in the dark, hugging Guadalcanal shoreline. The radar operator's voice came at 11:06 p.m. Contact, 23,000 yards, bearing west. Wright allowed himself a thin smile. The Tokyo Express was sailing straight into his ambush. Below deck, electrician's mate Harold Scott loaded star shells on USS New Orleans. The Japanese had no idea what was in store for them. To avoid spoiling the surprise, the crew was under strict orders not to energize the searchlights. They wouldn't need them. Radar would guide their guns tonight. But these weren't just supply runners. Tanaka had recently given his captains updated orders. In such an event, utmost efforts will be made to destroy the enemy without regard for the unloading of supplies. His destroyer Naganami carried no supplies at all, just a whole load of torpedoes. These crews had been running the Express for months, fighting and surviving in these waters. They knew night combat. At 11:15 p.m., Commander William Cole on Destroyer Fletcher signaled urgently, "Have a favorable position to fire torpedoes." Wright hesitated. The perfect moment was slipping away. Cole signaled again. The enemy was turning. 3 minutes passed. 4, 5. Finally, he gave the order to release torpedoes. It was too late. The Japanese column had already begun swinging away. 15 American torpedoes streaked through empty water, their visible wakes betraying their failure. The Americans had just blown their ambush on 8 destroyers. It didn't matter. They had the guns to finish the job. Wright was fuming at the failure of his torpedoes. At 11:23 p.m., he gave a hasty order, which betrayed his frustration. "Commence firing!" The night erupted. 5 American cruisers unleashed hell on the nearest Japanese destroyer, Takanami. Star shells burst overhead, turning darkness into harsh, flickering daylight. 8-inch shells rained down. The fireworks spectacle looked victorious and grand, but it was a massive blunder. Clarence Thibodeau on USS Pensacola would later recall with bitterness, "All 5 cruisers in our fleet concentrated their fire on just one target, leaving the rest of the enemy ships to maneuver freely against us." Takanami shattered spectacularly. She burned, exploded, and took nearly her entire crew to the bottom. The Americans kept firing, mesmerized by their target's destruction. A lesser commander would have unleashed return fire in a panic. But while American gunners fixated on one dying ship, Captain Torajiro Sato, commanding the main Japanese column, executed a perfectly disciplined course reversal. The US cruisers, blinded by their own muzzle flashes and starshell glare, had entirely lost track of these 7 ghosts. By 11:27 p.m., the Japanese launched their response. 44 Type 93 long-lance torpedoes, oxygen-fueled projectiles with 1,080-pound warheads that could reach out 20,000 yards with almost no visible wake. The Americans didn't even know these weapons existed. A minute later, a lookout in Minneapolis spotted a streak in the water. Too late. 2 long lances slammed into the flagship. The first tore off her entire bow, 120 feet of steel peeling away like paper, dangling by twisted metal. The second detonated in her boiler room. Fuel and ammunition erupted in a pillar of flame. Right behind, New Orleans tried to dodge her flagship's wreck when white light burst through the darkness. A torpedo found her forward magazines. Everything in front of turret number 2 simply ceased to exist. A quarter of the ship vaporized in one blinding instant. Ensign James Edwards barely got one shot off. The bow blew off and floated down beside the ship. 4 feet of water flooded the exposed decks. 183 men perished instantly, including Damage Control Officer Hubert Hayter, who gave his gas mask to a junior sailor and lost his life at his post. USS Pensacola, swerving to avoid the burning wrecks ahead, presented her full silhouette against the flames, a perfect target. Thibodeau recalled the exact moment a long lance found her. The deck rose like an ascending elevator. It sounded like huge redwoods cracking and falling. Flaming fuel geysered skyward, turning the aft deck into an inferno. 8-inch shells in Pensacola's No. 3 turret started cooking off one by one. More explosions erupted as 125 sailors vanished into the flames. In a couple of minutes, 3 of 5 American cruisers were sinking or crippled. The sophisticated radar, the overwhelming firepower, the supreme confidence, all were meaningless against an enemy they catastrophically underestimated. Just before midnight, Admiral Wright, realizing he was in no condition to lead, passed command from his shattered Minneapolis to Rear Admiral Tisdale on Honolulu. At the same time, 2 more long lances found USS Northampton. British observer Lieutenant William Lamb stood beside Northampton's captain. "I saw the torpedo tracks. We didn't see them until they were too close. The 9,000-ton cruiser lost power immediately, listed heavily, and began to roll." The discipline held even as Northampton sank. Men at the burning stern waited for proper abandon ship orders before jumping. Within 30 minutes, she rolled over and disappeared, the only US ship lost outright. But all 4 other cruisers were effectively destroyed as fighting units. Hundreds of Americans struggled in oil-slicked, burning water. Tibado, passing the flaming Minneapolis and New Orleans during the battle, I could hear their crews screaming and fighting for their lives. There was no time for us to respond. Dawn revealed the magnitude of the disaster. Nearly 400 American sailors were lost or wounded. 4 of 5 cruisers were knocked out in mere minutes. The destroyer Takanami represented Japan's only loss. 1 ship for 5. Admiral Samuel Cox would later rank Tassafaronga among the most ignominious defeats in US Navy history, surpassed only by Pearl Harbor. The US Navy had every advantage: radar, firepower, surprise, and threw it all away through hesitation, poor coordination, target fixation, and raw arrogance. They'd completely underestimated Japanese night fighting skills, their long-lance torpedoes, and their discipline under fire. As historian Richard Frank noted, Captain Sato's torpedo counterattack was one of the most professionally skilled performances of any Imperial Navy destroyer commander of the war. Admiral Wright's hesitation, those fatal minutes, transformed an ambush into a catastrophe. His pickup team of ships that had never trained together fell apart under pressure. The late addition of 2 destroyers without a briefing only added chaos. The aftermath brought immediate changes. Admiral Halsey, furious at the defeat, pulled heavy cruisers from Iron Bottom Sound's confined waters. Night combat training intensified. The Navy finally began understanding the long-lance threat they dismissed as impossible. Ironically, Wright's battered force did accomplish one thing. Not a single Japanese supply drum reached shore that night. Admiral Tanaka had won the battle, but failed his mission. Within weeks, Japan would evacuate Guadalcanal entirely. But the lesson was clear: never underestimate your enemy. The US Navy had learned this in the hardest way possible, through the lives of 400 sailors and the near destruction of an entire cruiser squadron in less than 20 minutes. As Tanaka himself reflected, the Japanese could win battles, but not the war against an enemy that learned from its mistakes. The Americans would never forget the night of the Long Lances, and never again would they enter battle with such dangerous overconfidence. If you have an idea for an app or website you have been wanting to get started, head over to lovable.dev. Use code WW2YT20 for 20% off. Valid until October 24th, 2025.